In those days, there were oceans of light, and cities in the sky, and wild flying beasts of bronze. There were herds of crimson cattle that roared and were taller than castles. There were shrill, viridian things that haunted bleak rivers. It was a time of gods manifesting themselves upon our world in all her aspects, a time of giants who walked on water, of mindless sprites and misshapen creatures who could be summoned by an ill-considered thought, but driven away only on pain of some fearful sacrifice. Of magics, phantasms, unstable nature, impossible events, insane paradoxes, dreams come true, dreams gone awry, of nightmares assuming reality. It was a rich and a dark time, the time of the sword rulers, the time when the Vadag and the Nadrag, age-old enemies, were dying, the time when man, the slave of fear, was emerging, unaware that much of the terror he experienced was the result of nothing else but the fact that he, himself, had come into existence. It was one of many ironies connected with man, who, in those days, called his race Mabden. The Mabden lived brief lives and bred prodigiously. Within a few centuries, they rose to dominate the westerly continent on which they had evolved. Superstition stopped them from sending many of their ships towards Vadag and Nadrag lands for another century or two. Gradually, they gained courage where no resistance was offered. They began to feel jealous of the older races. They began to feel malicious. Hello, you're listening to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. On this show we delve into the last of the big four fantasy incarnations of the Eternal Champion in the form of Corum Halen the Prince in the Scarlet Robe. The first Corum novel, The Knight of the Swords, dates back to 1971, so was also the last of those four to take shape in Moorcock's mind. In his introduction to the 1992 Millennium Edition, he explains the origins of the character. Dear reader, of all my fantasy stories, those about Corum Halen AC are the only ones founded in a specific language and mythology. Indeed, his story might never have been recorded had it not been for an exceptionally wet Cornish August, when the most interesting book I had available was a Cornish English dictionary with no corresponding English Cornish section, which meant I had to go through the whole thing from A to Z and do it myself. To a great extent, the fruit of that exercise is this book, which draws heavily on the Cornish language, Cornwall, and Cornish legendary. It should not be hard to guess, for instance, that Moidle's Mount lies not a mile from Marazion, and the Mabden interlopers are firmly bent on founding the barbarian settlements of Penzance and St Ives. As a boy, I was especially fond of the historical fiction of Sir Arthur Quiller Couch and his fellow Cornish resident Daphne du Maurier, while the West Country in general provided some of the most romantic settings for the stories of R.D. Blackmore, Maurice Baring, Geoffrey Farnall, Raphael Sabatini, and all those others who made brigandry and piracy seem such attractive careers, but perhaps my main inspiration came from a later novelist and poet, Henry Treece. For me, his stories of Celtic and Dark Age Britain remain the very best of their kind, and include such wonderful novels as The Golden Strangers and The Great Captains. He was the first author I ever read who made Arthur a living Celtic prince with human needs and ambitions. With Graves's The White Goddess, Mackenzie's Myths and Legends of the Celts, and Patrick Collum's The King of Ireland's Son, Treece's books are the greatest influence on these particular stories, which I dedicate here with great pleasure to my Cornish friends, especially David Hill, Bill Jekylls, and Mike Foreman. Phil and I recently holidayed in Cornwall, and I picked up a few pamphlets about Cornish wreckers and various other bits and pieces that really portrayed a picture of Cornwall as quite a rough and ready and dangerous place. And I think it really is excellent fodder for fantasy fiction and violent adventure tales. But anyway, it's been a while since I've risked putting my back out by pulling Clute and Grant's Encyclopedia of Fantasy off the shelf, but now's as good a time as any, and fortunately Phil's topped up our glucosamine supply, so I'm feeling reckless. Of Corum, the two Johns offer the following. Beginning in an Earth long before our present world has taken shape, and featuring a hero who is the last of the elf-like Vadag, this series can be seen as a fairly decorous assault upon J.R.R. Tolkien. Corum is much unlike Elric, metaphorically speaking. His back is to the reader, and he engages in his long war against Lord Ariok of Chaos with a certain elegance. Now, I have to confess that I don't really subscribe to the fairly common interpretation of Moorcock's worlds to be of our past, or in the case of Hawkmoon's Tragic Millennium Europe, our future. I've always read them as different but vaguely connected worlds, just a few tantalising windows we have onto Moorcock's Million Spheres. Also, Moorcock's opinion of The Lord of the Rings is well recorded, but the relentless comparisons between the two, and the suggestions that his own fantasies were responses to Tolkien, direct or indirect, are a little bit irksome. The concept of older races predating man is as old as fantastic fiction itself, and it doesn't always have to come back to Tolkien. At some point in the future, I think a panel show on Moorcock's essay, Epic Pooh, and the whole subject of influences and who is and isn't an anarchist or a crypto-fascist can maybe get a bit more room to breathe. Anyway, let's get down to business. Stay tuned at the end of the show for Chapter 2 of the Journal of Gerard Arthur Connelly, but right now, our table is set at Derry and Tom's. We're already a couple of sheets to the wind, so let's take a dive into Book 1 of The Knight of the Swords. Well, once again, we've got our table back in Derry and Tom's, our favourite table, as it happens, and I'm here with Loz. Hello, Loz. Welcome back.
Hello.
And today we are looking at The Knight of the Swords, the first appearance of Corum from 1971. And which edition are you working from, Loz?
1973.
1973 Mayflower edition, I believe?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Mayflower Science Fantasy.
Yeah, with a remarkable cover, which I think you just need to describe to us.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah. It almost looks like a ferocious Buddha wearing a hat of faces, a couple of snakes on each shoulder, as you do, eating loads of people. And then there's a little fella between some mountains, in the middle of the book.
Yeah.
I think that's about the best.
It's a classic Mayflower.
And he's got a bum chin.
Yeah.
Which is good. Quite a muscly fella.
Yeah.
And he's got 3 eyes.
Yeah.
As you do.
It's classic Mayflower. I think I mentioned to Tash on one of the last episodes that someone on Instagram commented on a photograph which included the Mayflower cover of The Jewel in the Skull. And they said, "Pa, another cover where obviously the artist didn't read the book. It's rubbish." I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You can't knock Mayflower covers. Yes, they're outrageously wacky. Yes, the artist had taken a heroic dose.
Yeah.
But you can't knock them.
It was the 70s.
Yeah.
He had
absolutely.
carte blanche to paint some of the weirdest crap he could think of.
Yeah. I've got the 1992 Millennium edition with Emo Corum on the cover.
Yeah, I quite had that.
I like it. It's a Japanese artist whose name.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very manga, isn't it? A manga cover.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
Yeah.
If I figure out who the artist is, I shall mention it in the intro. Oh, here we go. Illustration by Yoshitaka Amano.
Yeah,
nice one, Yoshitaka. We like it. We like it a lot. So, as usual, we've got what seems to be the latest in an increasingly challenging series of beers.
We have indeed.
To take us through our deep dive into The Jewel in the Skull. And this is from the
Knight of the Swords.
Poyala. Oh, yeah. Knight of the Swords.
Yep.
This is from the Poyala Cellar series, and it is Honeylaku, a beer imperial porter brewed with heather, honey, licorice root, black currants, aged in Pedro Jimenez and bourbon barrels. Okay, let's get into this, see what happens.
It's very similar to the last one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all right. It's it tastes like a strong porter with that undercurrent of brake fluid. A little bit too sweet for me.
Slightly nuggety quality. Gives you a bit of a film on the tongue.
Yeah.
Couldn't drink a lot of it.
Yeah, just for clarity, we're recording this after recording the Gerard Arthur Connelly RPG episode, so I think this is our third or fourth 10% porter that we're tackling.
It is, and to be fair, it's been a challenge.
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
It tastes like the fourth.
It does. Yeah. It's like, did you ever eat the chocolate version of Ready Brick when you were a kid?
No.
Did you not?
No, I don't think so.
Do you remember the flavours?
No, I only remember Ready Brick. I think there was a golden syrup one, wasn't there? But we didn't really have Ready Brick in our house. We had porridge oats.
Yeah, obviously, more old school than we were.
Yeah. And for the most part, we were so old school that generally our breakfasts tended to be boiled eggs, toast, and homebrew brown ale. Which probably explains the state I'm in 45 years later.
And obviously, a stout porter and a couple of chops on a Saturday.
Yeah.
As we all did.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was Hull, after all.
Yeah. Dark days.
Yeah.
But great days.
Good. And more beer, sir.
Yeah. Cheers. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's very it's very thick, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit like drinking treacle.
Yeah, I propose that this is the last time we do 10% plus BA porters.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm up there. That's a high five from me.
Yeah, fortunately we have our Wormwood vodka and Diet Coke at hand to watch it
just to get rid of some of that, clartiness.
Yeah. So, we are kicking off with, not the Dueling Skull, of course, as you pointed out, the Knight of the Swords. And you've commented before a number of times that actually Corum is your favourite of the Moorcock Eternal Champion.
Yeah,
Marcus.
so basically United Swords was the first Moorcock book I ever read. Got it from the library when I was rooting through the fantasy section, which was probably, a bit limited, a bit Terry Brooks-ish, that kind of stuff. Came across a very thin kind of book, really minimalist cover. And I thought, I'll give this a bash. And I remember reading about it in White Dwarf, the name. But I didn't know who Michael Moorcock was or anything.
Yeah.
Got the book and just was, going, man, this is just completely bombed out compared to every fantasy book I've ever read. So basically, if you think back to the Lord of the Rings stuff, very pastoral. It's very relatable in its landscape.
Yep.
Reading this was just like looking at a Yes cover, double gatefold sleeve going, holy shit, I don't get it, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, the description of Castle Eron, which we'll get to, is one of my favourites. It's like so psychedelic.
Yeah. But,
and although Moorcock is now into the early 70s with his writings, we've kind of got away from the write a book in 3 days period. He's writing this the year before he writes Elric of Melniboné. His writing style, he seems to have more time at it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more mature, I think. And that there are less kind of slapdash.
Some of the language is ace as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
To be honest, so when I first read this book, didn't know what Viridian was, didn't know what sardonic meant, didn't know. Sardonic is probably the word that stuck with me from Moorcock completely, and that was when I first read this. It was like, okay, don't know what that means. I'll look it up. I like it, and it kind of taught me some new words really when I was a kid, and it was cool.
Yeah, I really like as well the introduction to this.
It's amazing.
It's a 3-page scene setting, world building introduction, which is absolutely fabulous.
And as we were just saying a bit earlier before we started, that the first paragraph, if we could get John Hurt to read it with some ace background music, it would be,
Well, unfortunately, the listeners will have to settle for me and some ripped off Tangerine Dream.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with it.
If you can't get the Harmers, Grimsby will do.
Yeah. So another thing we also have to cover, because we always do, is pronunciation.
Yeah.
So, of course, we do know that by this stage, Moorcock has settled on the name Corum Halen Airsi. How do you feel about that pronunciation?
I went for a Yalen Airside myself.
Okay, so, We'll have to. We'll just stick with Corum.
Corum.
Yeah. But we found that in the 1969 edition of the Eternal Champion, in the flashback scenes and the dream scenes, it was Corum, Bannon, Flurran.
It was.
Yeah. Which,
not so good.
Not so good.
No.
But that's all been sorted out in subsequent editions with the revisions. So we're with Corum, Yalen RC, Stroke Halen SI. Yeah.
Similar. It's
And he is of the race of the. There we go.
I will go for Vadhag.
Vadhag. Now, I was looking at this earlier on. If this was Manx language, it would be Varach with a Harch.
Yeah, and it's probably Celtic though, isn't it?
Yeah, and if it was one of the other ones I looked up, AGHN's Ow. So Vadau or Nadrau.
Yeah, I don't like that.
I like Vadhag.
Yeah, I do.
I'm going to stick with it. Vadhag stroke Vadhag, even if it's wrong. It's what I've always thought of it in my head, so I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, and it comes down to when you're reading a book, you've got that pronunciation in your head, and that's always what it's going to be in your head.
Yeah.
Unless you hear Michael Moorcock read it,
it's
whatever you want it to be, isn't it?
Yeah. But drop us a line, Mike. Let us know.
Yeah.
I also tried to find a Cornish pronunciation guide, and I did find one, which actually even had audio files, but it didn't have the AGH bit anywhere near it. So we'll just have to deal with that. And when we speak about it, I'm just going to talk. I'm going to speak these names in the way that I've always read them since being a teenager, right or wrong.
Yeah.
So we'll get this really, really lovely introduction, part of which I've read out as the introduction to the show, the prologue, and it basically talks about the Vadak and the Nadrak being very, very ancient creatures that have lived on the earth, generally opposed to each other, separated, and really don't spend any time together. But in the meantime, while they've been relaxing back into their kind of decadent, laid-back lifestyles, the upstart race of man has arrived.
Similar to the Meldabonian Young Kingdoms.
There's a theme, isn't there? Because in the Eternal Champion, the Eldrin, or the Hounds of Hell, or whatever the humanity call them, have been around the longest, and the human are the upstarts. In the Young Kingdoms of Elric, the Melnibonians have been around for the longest time, and man is the upstart, and we have the same thing here. But interestingly, there's and I remember connecting this in my head at the time, because I'd read Stormbringer, the Ace Pocketbooks edition of Stormbringer was the first, possibly the first one I read. It was either that or Warlord of the Air from the late 60s. And there's a reference to the island of Pantang being a race of man called Mabden, who came from a different dimension.
Oh, right, okay.
And of course in this, the Mabden have emerged into this world, and it says the Mabden live brief lives and bred prodigiously, and they essentially start to spread out, and their fear of the Vadak and Nadrak starts to diminish, and this upstart breed of man begins, and it says, upstart man was beginning to breed and spread like a pestilence across the world. This pestilence struck down the old races wherever it touched them, and it was not only death that man brought, but terror too. Willfully he made of the older world nothing but ruins and bones. Unwittingly he brought psychic and supernatural disruption of a magnitude which even the great old gods failed to comprehend. And the gods actually become afraid of man as well. It's a really, really, really cool setting. Probably does have some similarities with that most omnipresent of fantasy staples, Tolkien, in that the elves are the ancient and man is the upstart race. So it's a common theme across everything. Interesting that Moorcock, despite his distaste for Tolkien and the tropes of Lord of the Rings, seems to follow quite a lot of the same basic trends. Yeah. But then again, that's actually rooted in English folklore, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. When I read this book, I was going through I'd probably describe as a nihilistic kind of period of my thinking. And looking back, because the way that the Mabden or the men are kind of portrayed in this, even in the second paragraph, the time when man, the slave of fear, was emerging. It's always it's quite an interesting. I always see this book, rightly or wrongly, as almost Michael Moorcock's view of humanity through a lens, pretty much. And the lens is obviously Corum. But it's basically starts off with the worst aspect of humanity, and then just shows the kind of the myriad of different people. Some people just want to get along, some people are just afraid, some people are driven by hatred, all this kind of stuff. And that's how I always read this book, was that kind of looking at humanity through an alien.
Yeah.
And the Vadag are pretty alien, aren't they? To when they first start describing men as humanity, let's just use humanity instead of men. It was seeing them almost as subjects to study, were they half beasts and all this kind of stuff. And that was what kicked in when I first read this book, was like, there's a lot of evil in the world, and that's how I perceived it when I was a kid. It was like, there's a lot of evil going around.
And again, that is a common theme with the Eldrin stroke Melnibonian stroke Vadag, is in that at points they have a cold scientific detachment towards man and do view them as lesser beings. Yeah,
and especially so in this book as well. There's loads of references when he's kind of almost studying humanity from afar.
Yeah,
and it's I mean, we'll come to it in a bit.
Yeah, comes a cropper, doesn't he? So there's also an indication here that the Vadak and the Nadrak have the ability to move between the dimensions they term the 5 planes.
Yeah.
So that ties into the Ghost worlds in the Eternal Champion and the Sundered worlds. It ties into the various planes of existence, which at this stage in Moorcock is talking more in terms of planes of existence, even though he's coined the multiverse term in the 60s in the novel, which I can't remember. I think it might be the Sundered worlds, isn't it? Or the Blood Red Game in the UK.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. There's a really great paragraph here where it talks about they had glimpsed and understood the nature of many planes other than the 5 through which the earth moved. Therefore it seemed a dreadful injustice that these wise races should perish at the hands of creatures who were still little more than animals. It was as if vultures feasted on and squabbled over the paralysed body of the youthful poet, who could only stare at them with puzzled eyes as they slowly robbed him of an exquisite existence they would never appreciate, never knowing what they were taking.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it's great. If they valued what they stole, if they knew what they were destroying, says the old Vadag in the story, now the clouds have meaning, then I would be consoled. It's just instantly evocative and brilliant.
And it goes back to like history, doesn't it? Where you've got like burning of books, and you've got like the destruction of culture, and there's the story of I think it's Prometheus. What some of his, I hope it's Prometheus. I come across the right arse, but it was there was a destruction of some of the Greek cities and all this kind of stuff by the Romans and barbarians and all this kind of stuff. And they were saying that because of certain texts were destroyed, that we are now 200 years behind where we should be from a mathematical and scientific point of view. And it's throughout history, isn't it? It's that the fear of barbarism destroying culture.
Yeah.
And it's 1930s burning books, That's the most recent one.
It is,
and it's still happening now.
Yeah, it's the cycle, isn't it? The destruction of knowledge that doesn't fit with your narrative.
Yeah, and that kind of sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The vulture and the young poet is quite a beautiful metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah. And, it goes into a little bit more detail about the philosophy of the universe, and those who curse the workings of the universe curse that which is deaf. Those who strike out of those workings fight that which is inviolate. Those who shake their fists at blind stars, which I think is also brilliant.
Yeah.
And then we get a reference to such beings, sometimes of great wisdom, who cannot bear to believe in an insouciant universe. Prince Corum in A.C. was one of these, perhaps the last of the Vadak race. He was sometimes known as the Prince in the Scarlet Robe, and this chronicle concerns him. And I absolutely adore that introduction, because
it's brilliant. Yeah.
Just recently, I've tried another fantasy book which has been repeatedly recommended to me, and I've had a go at it, I think 3 or 4 times, and maybe 3 times. And the first 2 or 3 pages, you get this little piece of world building and scene setting, but it mentions about 7 city names. There's about 4 or 5 different characters introduced on that first page, most of whom never appear again. And I found it so wearing. It's like, right, this is a fantasy book, so now I've got to digest some stupid names, a load of wacky city names, none of which really will be of any relevance further down the line, probably. And this is what passes for world building. Whereas this, really, it mentions 2 races, what the world's like, what shitbirds man is, and how horrendous the world is turning because of their presence.
Yeah.
And it's nice and simple. The language is beautiful. It's fantastic. And it really sets the scene brilliantly. I can't remember how far into my Moorcock reading this one came, because as I say, I started with Warlord of the Air and Elric, and just used to go to second-hand bookshops and pick them all up as I went along. And I'm not sure that Corum came to me via Pops. I think it was second-hand bookshops that fed me all the Corum stuff. So I can't remember where along the line it was. But I have said on this show before that I really love the 60s ones for how throwaway and brilliantly breakneck pace they are, and how well written they are, despite the fact they were written on the bog, and how they dash along at an incredible pace. But all of a sudden here, Moorcock is probably 31 by now, and he's really starting to hone his art in terms of wordcraft. And I think he said at one point, "I'd rather be a bad writer with big ideas than a great writer with bad ideas." But actually, at 31, he's a great writer now.
Yeah, to write.
He's a great writer, and this is really refreshing after doing book 3 of the Jew and the Skull. So, chapter 1 proper begins at Castle Iran, and we mentioned before that there's some really beautiful language here about the castle as well. But this is where Corum and the last 11 members of his family live in a castle that once took hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And they're lazing around, and all they're doing, they're creating music, they're creating poems, they're looking out the window,
painting,
pouncing
around.
Yeah, and I want to be them.
It's interesting.
I want to be them.
Even with the 11 people who live in the castle, 5 of them are retainers.
Yeah.
So 5 of them are servants.
Yeah.
It's like, nice one. You may be groovy. You may have just I've just been knocking out a symphony for the last kind of 100 years.
Yeah.
But can you bring me a sandwich, Frank? I'm a bit peckish. It's like it's still got that hierarchy of, we're not that cool, you know, we're not a communist collective, are we? You know.
Well, it goes back to what we said on the RPG episode, that all of Moorcock's characters, our main protagonists, are of noble stock.
Yeah, princes, dukes,
and here
emperors.
We are, closing towards the end of the world of the Vadak.
Yeah, dilettante.
And they've got their faithful returners.
Yeah.
Who are of the same race.
Yeah. Just not as...
But there's no egalitarian attitude.
When you have that interview, it's going, "Sir Corum, talk us through the hierarchy in the castle." Well, we treat them well. Yeah, they can do what they want. They can do their own symphonies if they want.
Yeah, this is Nigel. He's been my butler for the last 900 years.
And quite frankly, he's nailed it.
Yeah, Nigel stands there and nods, but inside he's weeping.
Yeah, going, I
haven't had a day off for 900 years.
I wish the Madden Herd could wipe us out. I'm well pissed off.
And, the description of Castle Iran is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
And there's just one line. It loved exceedingly the moody sea that washed Iran's northern walls and the pleasant forest that crept close to her southern flank. Castle Iran was so ancient that she seemed to have fused entirely with the rock of the huge eminence that overlooked the sea. Outside it was a splendour of time-worn turrets and salt-smoothed stones. Within it had moving walls which changed shape in tune with the elements and changed colour when the wind changed course. And there were rooms full of arrangements of crystals and fountains playing exquisitely complicated figures composed by members of the family, some living, some dead. And there were galleries filled with paintings brushed on marble and glass by Prince Klonsky's artist ancestors. And there were libraries filled with manuscripts written by members of both the Vadak and the Nadrag races. And elsewhere in Castle Iran were rooms of statues, and there were aviaries and menageries, observatories, laboratories, nurseries, gardens, chambers of meditation, surgeries, gymnasia, collections of martial paraphernalia, kitchens, planetaria, museums, conjuratoria, as well as rooms set aside for less specific purposes, or rooms forming the apartments of those who lived in the castle.
It's pretty cool.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah,
that's very cool. Especially the fact it's got gymnasia.
Yeah, exactly.
Not just got one gym. No. It's got multiple gyms.
Gymnasia.
Yeah. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, got one each. Apart from for Frank, the retainer.
Yeah.
He's not got one.
Yeah, Frank and Nigel, they've just got to lift books.
Yeah. Nigel, pass me my reading spectacles.
Yeah. So living there's Prince Klonsky, who's ancient. His wife, Kolatalana, who appears to be much younger.
Yeah.
And there's Elastru. But you know what? I'm not reading these bloody names out. It's going to time. tongue all over the place.
Prince Rannan.
But they're all Vadak. They're all chilling out. They're all, and you would get the Vadak features.
Yeah,
described,
which is interesting.
which is basically the same as the Eldrin.
But the eyes.
Narrow, long skulls, ears that were almost without lobes and tapered flat alongside the head, fine hair that a breeze would make rise like flimsy clouds about their faces, large almond eyes that had yellow centres and purple surrounds, wide, full-lipped mouths, and skin that was a strange gold-flecked rose pink. Their bodies were slim and tall and well-proportioned, and they moved with a leisurely grace that made the human gait seem like the shambling of a crippled ape. So, yeah, pretty swish.
But yellow and purple eyes. I remember when I read that, I was like, it took me ages to kind of like, I was getting my imagination working, going, what the hell does that look like?
Yeah.
And then later on, they change when they're a bit cross, don't they?
Ah, I've forgotten that. So we also found that Prince Klonsky, head of the household, is a bit old now. You can see his muscles and his veins through his skin.
Well, that's a brilliant thing, isn't it? So this kind of description of Klonsky.
Yeah.
Prince Klonsky's skin was almost milk white and so thin that all of the veins and muscles were clearly displayed beneath. He had lived for over 1,000 years and only recently his age began to enfeeble him. And then the next bit is quite interesting. It goes back to kind of the suicide booths almost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Of chambers.
Yeah.
When his weakness became unbearable, when his eyes began to dim, he would end his life in the manner of the Vadhag, by going to the chamber of vapours and laying himself on the silk quilts and cushions and inhaling the various sweet-smelling gases until he died.
Yeah.
It's all right, isn't it?
It's like a more pleasant version than the end of Soylent Green, isn't it?
Yeah. Slightly better.
Yes, slightly better in that he's not going to get eaten.
No.
It
don't mention it anyway.
So you've got this super... I don't know if decadent's the right word, but you've got this ancient civilization where they just lay around creating poetry to the point where they're just like, 1,000 years. But I've had a good innings.
I'm all right, haven't I? I've done my symphonies.
But I think the Chamber of Vapours.
Yeah, but all of that kind of, because it's almost futuristic, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
Because you read it going, they're living in this massive cave, pretty much, because it's worn to look like the surrounding area.
Yeah.
But they've got planetaria and surgeries and all kinds of craziness.
Yeah, have you ever seen Zardoz?
Sadly, I have, yeah.
Yeah, well, I love Zardoz. I'm an unashamed Zardoz fan. But the human enclave that Sean Connery ends up at, if they had a budget, it would have been this.
It would, yeah.
And I do wonder whether John Borman had actually read this, because the human enclave that he ends up going to really is this.
It is.
They're immortal. When the difference is when they get to old age, they end up getting put in a bizarre old people's home with John Alderton.
Slightly
Which
different.
Is slightly different, but it's so similar. It's fantastic. So they're super long lived, and Prince Klonsky decides that he wants Corum to do him a solid before he goes to the chamber of.
All right, so do us a solid.
He wants to do a solid before he goes to the chamber of vapours, and he wants Corum to head out into the world to see that.
It's Prince Opash, isn't it? At Castle Sarn,
yes,
I believe.
He wants to go and make contact with distant members of his family who he hasn't seen for centuries, just to,
see what's going on. Yeah.
Check out the lie
Come
of the
back
land.
to him before he goes and have a bit of a lie down.
So already, we've got Corum. He's pretty much got a quest, which is kind of cool, because usually you've got to go through quite a bit before you get to quest mode. But we're instantly kicking off in quest mode. So Corum sets out from Castle Iran to begin his quest.
But he's quite naive, isn't he, Corum? He's very much a cloistered prince in a magic house going, everything's great. I'll just go and visit my family. Oh, brilliant, it'll be great.
Oh, God, I'll just put aside all my weird tubes that I've been creating
that was the thing, innit?
Week-long compositions with.
Because quest mode's kicked in, but basically goes, Dad, can I just... I've got a symphony I want to finish. So he probably spends another 3 months doing like the middle eight, going, I'm not happy with it. I like it, but I think it needs more weird tubular... It's the equivalent of Mike Oldfield, isn't it? I think.
You were about to say tubular bells,
but tried not to, but it came out.
So he heads on out into some beautiful forests, and again, I mean, I'm not going to read a lot of this out.
I think we just need to point out that he goes out to visit his family, but make sure he's got 2 spears, a bow, an axe, and a sword, and some armour.
Yeah,
just in case.
So he just got prepped, but maybe that's kind of
that's the way they roll.
That's the way they roll due to all those years of conflict with the Nadrag. So he has we get a lovely little travelogue. He heads out through the forests, which he hasn't seen for a long, long time. And yeah, of course, we get a nice little description of his get-up, what he's taken with him. And he's got his conical silver helm, which has his full name carved in 3 characters above the short peak.
Which I think is a bit
flash,
too much, don't you?
Bit flash.
Just in case.
Corum, Yalen, Ersi, meaning Corum, the prince in the scarlet robe. It was the custom of the Vadag to choose a robe of distinctive colour and identify themselves by means of it. It's a good job there's not many of them left.
Yeah, exactly. Because you'd run out of colours, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would.
Prince of the brown robe and that kind of stuff. You go, so it's just like Mr.
If you were late to the party, choose your colour.
Yeah, I've got a dusty beige colour.
Yeah. So he's out there and he's got a double byrnie made up of a million tiny links.
And I think the other Moorcock trope is he's quite into samite, isn't he? So,
yes.
So he's got a blue samite kind of shirt and some breeks.
Yeah.
Which were of soft brush leather.
Yeah. So he pals on through the forest. He's actually quite having a good time.
He is.
Just chilling
He's
out.
enjoying it, yeah.
Wandering the forest.
He's got a red horse as well.
Oh, nice. So soon Corum leaves the forest and has reached the great plain called Brogfythus.
Yes.
Where once the Vadag and the Nadrag had met in bloody mystical battle. So he's doing a tour of battlefields. He's really, doing the whole...
he's almost doing
thing.
He's doing the year-out, gap-year travelling piece, isn't he?
Yeah. And towards the middle of the day, he finds himself at the centre of Brogfythus, and he comes to the spot that marked the boundaries of the territories as he roamed as a boy. Here was the weed-grown wreckage of the vast sky city that, during the month-long battle of his ancestors, had careered from one plane to another, rupturing the fine fabric that divided the different dimensions of the earth until, crashing at last upon the gathered ranks of Vadag and Nadrag, it had destroyed them. It's all very sci-fi, that, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? You've got a dude with a pointy hat on a red horse with a destroyed sky city. And that in itself is an amazing image for a fantasy. Yeah, you want that painted, or you want that in a film.
Yeah.
It'd be amazing as a... don't make a Elric TV show, make a Corum one, it'd be ace.
Yeah, and actually, if they did make an Elric TV show... We are at that point now where it would look tired and out of date because it's been ripped off so much. But this stuff is still pretty fresh and groovy.
Yeah, you never see TV shows with red horses and
crashed sky cities.
No.
Yeah. So it travels on for another 3 days. And there's a real nice mention. He says once or twice he had seen strangely shaped rocks where Vadag castles had stood, but they had been no more than rocks. It occurred to him that these rocks were the transmogrified remains of Vadag dwellings, but his intellect rejected such an impossibility. Such imaginings were the stuff of poetry, not of reason. Have you ever been to the south of France and the foothills of the Pyrenees?
I have, not for a while, but yeah.
We were there a few years ago, and of course you've got all those old Cathar castles.
Yeah.
And that description is exactly like being in the foothills of the Pyrenees, where you see things that you think, no, that's just a rock. And then at a certain angle, you realise it's a crafted archway or an old window. And you realize, holy shit, that actually is the remains of some old structure or dwelling. Yeah. And when you see stuff like Queribus and Montsegur, and how beautifully crafted the stonework was that made them seem like they actually grew from the mountainside. Yeah. When they break down over the subsequent hundreds and hundreds of years, it really is like a blend of nature and mankind. But depending on which direction you're looking from and what the light is like at the specific time, you change your mind every time as to whether it was real or imaginary.
Yeah, man-made or natural.
Yeah.
But... yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It's brilliant. So anyway, in another 3 days, it'll be at Castle Krakar, where his aunt, the Princess Lorim, lived. So he has a kid.
Oh, will he?
Indeed.
So the next chapter is called the Madden Herd, which kind of sets things up.
The fact that it's even called the Madden Herd.
Yeah. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Mm. And then it's the first time he comes across the Mabden as a a hole, and the way it's described is the way he's looking at, almost like a scientist would look at an animal.
Yeah, he's observing them, isn't he?
Yeah, and not understanding it. It's completely alien to him.
Like there's no fear.
Yeah,
it's very detached.
Yeah, it's just the behaviour is just like, well, that's a bit interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. It says, close they came, and still Corum observed them with intense curiosity as they would study any unusual beast he had not previously seen.
And then we've got these are peculiar brutes in truth, mused Corum, half aloud.
Yeah.
It's like, hello. Yeah. It's like that thing. When you get a film where you get like the scientist character going, oh, this is very interesting, and then they get eaten by a dinosaur or something.
Yeah, and he observes these chariots of timber and beaten bronze, drawn by shaggy horses, and behind the chariots came wagons, some open with and some with awnings. Perhaps they carried females, Corum thought, for there were no females to be seen elsewhere. And then he thinks, well, they've got thick, dirty beards, long tashes, matted hair.
Bit greasy, aren't they?
They yell at each other and pass wineskins around. And he says, astonished, Corum recognised the language as the common tongue of the Vadag and the Nadrag, though much corrupted and harshened. So, the Mabden had learned a sophisticated form of speech.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, these weird people.
Yeah.
And then, he picks out a couple of words, and he says, like, Sheffenhau, which is like a translation of a Vadag word, isn't it, for fiend. And then they call themselves the Denled High Sea, don't they, which is, again, he says it's a bastardisation of the word murderers. So these Mabden call themselves murderers. That's their kind of the name for themselves.
Yeah.
Which kind of sets you up, doesn't it, thinking there might be wrong uns.
And he realises that before long the wagons don't contain females, but booty. And these stinking, drunk men who are almost falling out of their chariots are dressed in all manner of clothing that includes clothes of stolen samite and linen. But for the most part, they're just wearing dirty animal skins.
Greasy outfits.
Yeah, they look like a right bunch of wrong-uns.
Yeah. So it's the equivalent of going, you're in town, see a few wrong-uns beating each other. Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Run away.
Yeah. And he's struggling at this point to realise how, or even to recognise how such dirty bastards could possibly have won a fight with, or done battle with Vadag warriors and won. And he noticed also that they've got some prisoners of their own species who they're dragging along on ropes, and he's horrified that they would treat their own species. And that's where he says, these are peculiar brutes in truth. Yeah.
But still not have that emotional connection of these people seem to be tortured. It doesn't seem great.
Yeah.
Then you've got the Bane of Beauty, the Doom of Truth, and that's when he arrives at Castle Sarn, isn't it?
Yeah, Valley Krakar. And the castle of Princess Lorim. Yeah. Well, it's all knackered, isn't it? It's a smouldering ruin. He realises that this is probably where the Mabden have been and where they've bagged all of their booty. Fire had brought Castle Krakar down. Fire had eaten her folk. For now, Corum, as he rode his snorting horse around the ruins, made out blackened skeletons, and beyond the ruins were signs of battle. A broken Mabden chariot, some Mabden corpses, an old Vadag woman chopped into several pieces.
And then he has that conversation with the Nadrag, doesn't he? And then that's the world building there, isn't it? He has that conversation. The conversation is basically, fuck all. You've been sat in your castle, poncing around while the Mabden have taken over, and he's basically talking about you're actually living in a place that's got a king, a Mabden king, and you just. Yeah, you're clueless. And you see a bit of the Nadrag, which I never really could kind of visualise massively as a race. So I remember they're described as they had like hair down to the foreheads, didn't they?
Yeah, they have like low brows and kind of almost a little bit ape-like in the description. Yeah, I could never quite really get my head around what they were supposed to be, but I suppose they're only really a cipher anyway. They don't really play any great role in things.
I don't think there's any of them until the last book, is there? King of Swords.
So anyway, he finds the Mabden camp, and by this point he's still completely and utterly detached from everything and super naive. So he actually walks into the camp and calls him out.
Well, that's because originally, so when he meets the Nadrag, they've been using like kind of hounds, aren't they, to hunt down the Vadag, and he finds out that he goes, oh yeah, there was one more castle left, and it was obviously his castle.
Yeah.
So that's when Corum goes, holy shit,
yeah,
that's my castle, and that's when he pals back, isn't it? And again, as you said, he goes back and sees Castle Aeron completely bugger shit face because they've taken over it, and that's when he does his massive you're the knobheads, and he kills a few people quite brutally, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And each kind of, it's called a lesson learned, isn't it, that chapter? And each time he does something, it's like, and he learned this, isn't he?
Yeah, and he actually goes on some other castles and finds them all in exactly the same situation. Comes across more Mabden with faces pocked with disease, thick with grease and filth, their bodies strung with barbaric ornament, and he wonders at their power of destruction. And it still adds to believe that insensitive beasts as these, who appear to have no second sight at all, could bring ruin to the great castles of the Vadak. So he's still struggling to accept what he's seeing with his own eyes.
And the Nadrag conversation is, slay me, I pray, Vadag, do not let me linger. I don't know how to kill, Corum replied. Then you must learn. And that's the kind of thing. And then the next bit is the lesson learned, isn't it? So he goes back to the castle. Obviously, it's been brutalised by the Denled High Sea. It's almost in little sentences, isn't it? So the first one is, they were lounging in their chariots, pouring sweet Vadag wine down their faces and into their gullets. The sounds of the sea and the blaze hid the sound of Corum's approach, until his spear pierced the face of the Denled High Sea warrior, and the man shrieked. Corum learned how to kill. And then the next bit is, but Corum held the spear now, and it struck through the man's bronze breastplate and into his heart. He learned how to be cruel. Yeah.
Unfortunately, in his learning how to kill, he comes across one particularly unpleasant Mabden, who will be his nemesis in Glandith Acre.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Glandith. Who is totally, if we pull out Lord Shark's ostentatious couch, which on this occasion is some old bits of 2x4 with bent and rusty nails in it.
Yeah. But with a nice kind of faded velvet over the top of it.
Yeah, just so it looks all right. But still hurts.
Yeah, but it's painful.
It's 1970s Oliver Reed.
You think?
Fantasy casting Glandith Acre. It's 1970s Oliver Reed with a beard.
Potentially, yeah. I think he might be a bit too handsome though, because Glandith Acre was quite a pocked.
Oh, well, greasy. Give him some prosthetics.
Yeah.
Who else then? Who would you cast as Glandith Acre?
In Blade Runner, who was also in Southern Comfort.
Brian James.
Yes.
Brian James, if he were alive, would have made a towering Glandith Acre.
Yeah.
He would, yeah.
I would possibly go for him.
Yeah.
He'd be possibly a bit tall.
Yeah, that would work, actually.
Yeah, he would be good.
Yeah. I'm sure there were lots of 70s character actors with interesting faces who could have done this, but I think Brian James would have been a good shout.
Yeah.
So anyway, Glandith Acre and Corum come face to face, and they have a bit of a scrap. He says he was breathing harshly now and staggered. Other chariots raced by on both sides, and a sword struck his helmet. Dazed, he fell to one knee, a spear at his shoulder, and he fell in the chained mud. Then Corum learned cunning. Instead of attempting to rise, he lay where he had fallen until all the chariots had passed. Before they could begin to turn, he pulled himself to his feet. His shoulder was bruised and the spear had not pierced it. He stumbled through the darkness, seeking to escape the barbarians. Then his feet struck something soft, and he glanced down and saw the body of his mother, and he saw what had been done to her before she died, and a great moan escaped him, and tears blinded him, and he took a firm grip on the axe in his left hand, and painfully drew his sword, screaming, "Glandith Acre!"
Yeah.
And Corum had learned the lust for revenge. This is so well written.
And his eyes turned from yellow and purple to black and gold as well, which is quite cool.
Yeah. So it
makes them very alien as well.
Sadly, he fights over the body of his mother, and he kills more people and splits more skulls, and he comes face to face with Glandith Acre. But it doesn't go entirely well for him. And there is that lovely bit where it says Corum's black and gold eyes, because he's enraged. His entire demeanour and appearance is altered. Unfortunately,
don't go well, does it?
No, it don't go well. And Corum He's all over him, but he's spent the last of his strength. It's too weak from all the fighting, and frankly, probably not being used to it. And then they knock his helmet off and knock him out.
This is the knocking out piece, right? So you go back to the RPG stuff, knocking somebody out the back of the head.
Yeah.
It happens twice in the first half of this book, and both times it's quite, let's just finish this chapter.
Well, you know what? They've got to knock him out so he can wake up and be maimed rather brutally. I do remember reading this and thinking, this guy's the hero. This is really fucking harrowing.
Honestly,
not harrowing enough that he's just found his mother in that terrible state.
Yeah, and basically his whole family wiped out. Yeah, that whole thing for me when I was first reading it was going, holy shit, what is this writer on about?
Yeah.
So the hero, it's interesting as well because still when he realises it's not going to go well for him, he goes, why? Why are you doing it? Because he still doesn't understand why.
Yeah, I don't get it.
And he got Glandith, which is, it can be many kind of people throughout history. Yeah, when he's basically going, right, so why are you doing it? You should know, we hate your sorcery, we love your superior heirs, we desire your lands and those goods of yours which are of use to us, so we kill you. And then Corum's still going, you say, hey, we have no sorcery and all this kind of stuff, and he's saying, we've seen your castles and your evil contraptions, what they contain. And basically it's that thing of brutalism versus sophistication again, isn't it? Right, we're destroying this because we don't understand it.
Yeah.
And it still happens now, doesn't it? You've got people blowing up statues because they don't understand it. I wasn't about the recent stuff. I was more, when you have the Taliban blowing up stuff.
Yeah, Glenapenge, Mesopotamian, historical.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about the Confederate stuff. Yeah. It was,
Yeah. Even at the point where they bring up the brazier and they've pretty much got him nailed to a board.
Yeah.
And it says, a great brazier was brought forward. It was full of red-hot charcoal and from it poked irons of various sorts. These were instruments especially designed for torture, thought Corum. What sort of race could conceive such things and call itself sane?
Yeah.
So he's still struggling to get his head round it.
And then, there's a couple of... So in Reservoir Dogs, where Mr. Bond goes, torture you, that's a cool idea. I don't care what you got to say, blah, 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 really chilling. And this one here, where he's going, you see, you do not know. The Zudavadhag died swiftly or relatively so, because we had so many to find and so many to kill, but you were the last. We can take our time with you. We think, in fact, we will give you a chance to live. If you can survive with your eyes gone, your tongue put out, your hands and feet removed, and your genitals taken away, and then we'll let you so survive. And I remember reading that as a kid going, what a bastard.
Yeah, I distinctly remember this.
Just going, holy shit.
I remember reading this at the time as much as anything I ever read by Moorcock and the impact it had on me.
Yeah.
Especially when you get things like, if Corum had eaten anything in the last few days, he would have vomited then. As it was, bile came into his mouth and his stomach trembled and ached. There were no further preliminaries. Yeah. It's like, oh, fucking hell.
But before, after that speech, he then goes, he signalled to his men, bring the tools, let's begin. I was like, no.
Yeah.
What?
And then it happens.
Yeah.
It happens. They put out his eye. He tries to get his second sight so he can shift plane to try and escape it, but the pain just brings him back, and it says... Corum gave one last huge tug and his wrist came free. He put up the hand to touch the blind eye but still felt nothing. He looked at the hand. There was no hand, just a wrist, just a stump, and he screamed again, and the pain dragged him back to the experience of the torture. It's really horrifying.
Yeah, it's hideous, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's your hero of the book.
Yeah.
And I'd not read anything like it before, and I was like, holy shit, this guy's not pulling any punches, is he?
Yeah.
This poor dude, just, horrible.
Yeah. It's really unpleasant, and Glandith is still laughing, having a great time. Yeah. Fortunately, he manages to shift himself slightly into another plane, only essentially making himself invisible, but it's enough for the thick Mabden to think, he's got away!
And run to the forest.
Yeah. So he's thoroughly maimed now. He's had his eye put out, he's had his hand chopped off, he's in a bit of a state. But he does manage to put off the rest of the torture and fortunately retains his genitals.
Which is good.
Yeah, because he'll need him in a few chapters.
He might do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Fortunately, we have a nice piece of moorcock character bumps into a companion who helps him out.
yeah.
Good old brown man of law.
Yeah.
I love the brown man of law.
Good fella.
And in a way, unlucky brown man of law. But, for the time being, we're digging it.
Yeah.
And this was another one of the things that shocked me at the time was what goes down with the brown man of law.
Yeah, I forgot about that, actually. Just you mentioned it,
Yeah. So the brown man of law picks up Corum and carries him away whilst he continually faints and gets him away from the Mabden camp. But the brown man, Mr. Here we go. How do you fancy this one?
I didn't even go there. It was
so
weird.
Said Corum, pronouncing the name poorly.
Yeah, not as poorly as we did, but yeah.
Fair play. Yeah, so it's similar in a way to his encounter with Oladan. He has some tucker. The brown man of law
was the other guy in the background then, the 12-foot, 6-foot wide dude.
Oh right, is that not the brown man of law?
No, that's the other guy who ends up to be. You find out in the second book who it is. Then they've both been there for like hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah,
hiding.
So he's a bit of a fucking wretched mess.
Yeah,
and but the brown man of law is helping him out, gives him something to eat.
Yeah,
allows him to have a kip, and Corum stays with him for 5 days in the valley of the brown man of law.
And then there's a bit of a to-do, isn't there, where Corum's going, I'm going to go and seek my vengeance in the nude with me one eye and one hand.
Yep.
And the brown man's going, nah, you're all right. And he takes him to another Mabden...
Oh, yeah, the causeway. Moidal's Mount.
Moidal's Mount, yeah. St Michael's Mount.
Went there last year for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
Cornish.
St Michael's Mount, yeah. I've been to both. I've been to Mont Saint Michel as well. Mont Saint Michel is something else. St Michael's Mount is nice, but Mont Saint Michel is massive by comparison.
Is it?
Mont Saint Michel is like you've got the causeway across to it, and then you've got the wall, and then you have a winding street that goes all the way up, and there's shops and restaurants and various other things, and you get to the top, and it's an old church.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely stunning. It's a beautiful place to stay, and there are hotels on there. And we've always intended to get a hotel there and stay on there for a couple of nights.
That'd
so once all
cool,
the tourists have gone,
yeah,
you kind of got the run of the place and the restaurants and bars. But the last time, we've been a few times, whenever we're in Brittany or in that neck of the woods, we always go just because it's so spectacular. And the last time we were there, we walked across the causeway and we'd literally just got there, and I think one of us nipped to the bog or whatever, and we came out. And there was a whole procession of monks had come across the causeway,
really?
Looking like they were in medieval, just looking like they could just come from the monastery, so it looked medieval. One at the front with carrying a massive crucifix, swinging censers with incense, and they basically marched a trail, about 200 of them, up the winding street up to the church at the top. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was brilliant. Such one of those goosebump type moments. Now I'm not religious, but it was like something out of The Name of the Rose.
Yeah,
if it wasn't for all the people in shorts with cameras and all that business, but it was brilliant. It was brilliant. All that stuff is still live and happening and real there.
Yeah, I remember when I went to Cologne Cathedral, which is like it looks like the one out of Batman.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah. And we camped there, and there was a procession of like a choir basically just singing choir songs all the way to church. It was just amazing. Yeah. And I'm the antithesis of religious, but even that, it's like, that's beautiful. It's like amazing. So he goes to Moidal's Mount, where he gets dropped off the causeway, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then the brown man of Leia bogs off, and he's in the middle of the causeway, and there's some people on horses coming towards him.
Yeah.
And again, that would be a very ace scene in a TV show.
Yeah. So at this point, he's got to either go back or try and get to Moidal's Mount. But as it happens, he gets swept out to sea anyway.
Yeah.
And he starts to drown. But fortunately, he gets rescued by, that's right, a Lythian Mabden who appeared to have little in common with the Mabden warriors of Glanditha. So this lot obviously are attractive and cultured.
Yeah, they're not greasy.
Yeah.
They use soap.
He gets rescued and taken up there, where he meets... And he says that he can hardly believe this is Mabden architecture because it's pretty swish.
Yeah, he's impressed, isn't he?
So there are obviously other types of Mabden who aren't these depraved beasts who must have been around a little bit longer.
And
so there's a few of them.
Pony tribes, don't they?
That's right, yeah. That they tell him that they're evidently not what they call Mabden of the East.
Yeah.
And he gets introduced to who Natasha would describe as Woman 1.
Yeah, Woman 1, Relena.
So Woman 1, Relena, the Margravine.
Again, a noble.
Yeah, and, because he's a prince and she's the Woman 1, they fall in love, naturally.
Of course they do.
Because that's just how it works.
Yeah.
And they spend some hot time together.
They do.
Now, her husband, the Margrave, Earl Moidle of Alamglil, killed in a shipwreck. So she's a bit fed up. She's a widow. Which,
she is.
Come on. You're a prince. Despite the fact you've only got one eye and your hand's been lopped off, you're pretty handsome. She's a widow.
Yeah, exactly. He's got all the moves by being a bit of a moody twat.
Yep.
Talking about vengeance a lot.
Yeah.
It's very attractive, isn't it, to people.
And, in the end, it goes all right for him.
He gets obsessed with the Mag and Mag.
The Doom of Mag and Mag. Jack O'Neilly. Oh, yes. I actually got to a point with Gerard Arthur Connelly and Jack O'Neilly where I started to forget what I'd made up and what I'd stolen. There was a time where I thought, no, Jack O'Neilly was mine, wasn't it? But no, it wasn't.
They hang out for a bit.
Yeah, he's pretty much moping the entire time, being filled with rage, and she's saying, "Oh, you know what? You're not that ugly now. I've seen worse."
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, but I'm going to get Glenn the Crane." She's, "Oh, just chill out." He gets in the sack with the Margravine. She's happy with a bit of Corum, despite his one eye and one hand. Mm-hmm. She's obviously getting over her bereavement. He's reading lots and lots of books in the library to try and figure out what he can do about his hand and eye, so he can take his revenge on Glenn the Crane. Yeah. So he reads shitloads of books, and then he rushes back to the library to consult the book she'd mentioned. He finds it and discovers that the name of the island that he needs to go to is Fian Fan La Brule. Not a pleasant name. As far as Corum could make out, it meant home of the gorged god. What could that mean? He inspected the text for an answer, but found none. So he buggers about, copying out charts and reference points given by the captain of the ship that had visited Moidle's Mount 30 years before. And it was very late when he sought his bed and found Relena there, and she'd wept herself to sleep. He knew that it was his turn to offer her comfort, but he had no time.
What a guy.
Oh, what a geezer. He undressed, eased himself into bed between the silks and the furs, trying not to disturb her. But she wakes up and they get on it anyway.
Yeah.
Be rude not to.
It's in that position. And the furs, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be rude not to. Yeah, Winter's reached his fiercest by this point, and the Mabden turn back up, and the youth who rescued him figures out that it's the Pony tribes. Yep, Belden. And poor old brown man of La, well, he's come a cropper for helping out Corum. So Corum decides, well, you know what? We need to figure something out, so I'll go back and get back into the books again.
Yeah.
So off he pops, gets back to his books and his manuscripts, where Relena is doing the same thing, and they come up with a battle plan. And they attempt to parley, of course, but that didn't go out particularly well.
Parleys never do.
No, and Corum exchanges a "you fuck off, no you fuck off" with Glanditha Cray, and then they get down to it and they realise that it's fight on. And unfortunately, at this point, the brown man of La is flung over the back of his horses to fall upon the causeway. Poor lad. So chapter 11, the summoning. So at this point,
I think the quick version is she finds a sorceress manuscript to summon a ship from beneath the waves, doesn't she?
Yeah, just to add insult to injury, Glandith wearing Corum's hand round his neck on a chain.
That seems to be just like a touch too far, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit rude.
Wasn't wearing his eye as well, was he?
No.
It was like a brooch.
So Corum and Glandith end up going for mano combat.
Yeah. And Corum wearing some kind of crustacean-based armour.
He's wearing a crab breastplate of some description. Yeah. The armour was unfamiliar, consisting of a breastplate, backplate, greaves and a kilt, all made from the pearly blue shells of a sea creature called the Anufek, which had once inhabited the waters of the west. The shell was stronger than the toughest iron and lighter than any byrnie. A great spined helmet with a jutting peak had, like the helmets of the other warriors of Moidle's castle, been manufactured from the shell of the giant murex. Servants helped Corum don his gear, and they gave him a huge iron broadsword that was so well balanced he could hold it with his one good hand. His shield, which he had them strapped to his handless arm, was the shell of a massive crab, which had once lived, the servants told him, in a place far beyond even Luanesh, and known as the land of the distant sea. This armour had belonged to the dead Margrave, who had inherited it from his ancestors, who had owned it long before it had been considered necessary to establish a Margravate at all. So not only is he nobbing Relena, He's wearing her husband's armour as well.
Dead man's crab armour.
Dead man's crab armour.
Which seems a bit disrespectful, doesn't it?
It does a bit.
Yeah.
But the head down, he goes for the old mano-a-mano combat with Glandith the Cray. But of course, Glandith being a rough sort and a bit of a bad lad, he's not game for it.
Doesn't he?
He does. He cheats real badly, and they get into a bit of a scrap. They have a little bit of back and forth, and then Glandith attempts to have archers shoot him down. What a rotter.
And, he didn't see that coming.
No.
What a buffoon.
No.
He should have read page 4 of the treatise to defend the castle.
Yeah. So he defends his way backwards down the causeway to get back to the castle. The water starts to come back in again, and the Belden and the archers are showering arrows down onto the pony tribesmen, causing confusion in the causeway. And Corum escapes back into the castle. He says, I must have a new hand and a new eye. The sea saves him for that point.
Yep.
But the Denladesi have regrouped on the shore. The dead men and their ponies, as well as the corpse of the brown men of Lar, had been washed away by the sea. A few corpses bobbed among the rocks below the castle. Here and there were the bodies of their own warriors and barbarians who had managed to sneak into the castle through poorly defended windows and balconies. Had Relina been taken by a party of barbarians? Then, from the balcony of her apartment, he heard a strange sound. It was a singing sound like nothing he had experienced before. He paused, then approached the balcony cautiously. Relina stood there, and she was singing. The wind caught her garments and spread them about her like strange multicoloured clouds. Her eyes were fixed on the far distance, and her throat vibrated with the sounds she made. So she's casting a big spell to save the day, and a huge ship rounds the headland, and it was the source of the strange green light, and it sailed rapidly, although there was no wind at all. So it's the Margrave. Come back.
Yeah.
Save the day.
He's back.
He's a bit dead, and his crew are a bit dead, but
There's a bargain.
there's a bargain. The ship reached the causeway when it stopped. It reeked of ozone and decay, and Glandith the Cray and his men, because they're superstitious sorts, they all fuck off back into the forest because they're a bit freaked out. The dead Margravine says, I need something from you in return. And he wants Relina. He wants his missus back.
Of course he does. He knows dead.
Yeah. But it turns out they need Relina to stay afloat.
Yep.
And with they're on board, they'll continue to live, even though it's a living death. And they say, we are the slaves of Shul and Jaivan, for we died in the waters that he rules. Now let us be rejoined, my wife and myself. But, of course, Corum's not particularly happy with this. And he says, who is this Shul and Jaivan? And so, he is our master. He is of, conveniently enough, Svian Fanla Brule.
Of course he is.
The home of the gorged god. The place where Corum had meant to go anyway. Corum says, you know what? The dead have no right to take the living. And he starts to have a bit of a scrap with some of the corpses. Says, stop them, take me instead. But they're not having it. So he says, I'll come with you then.
Yeah.
And the Margarine goes, all right.
Could be worse.
Yeah.
Could be on my own.
Fair play.
With the dead fellas.
So they get escorted to be led aboard the ship, covered in scum from the bottom of the sea, weed draped off it, giving it the strange green fire. What Corum had thought were dull jewels were coloured barnacles which encrusted everything. Slime lay on all surfaces. While the Margrave watched from his poop, Corum and Relina were taken to a cabin and made to enter. It was almost pitch black and it stank of decay. He heard the rotting timbers creak and the ship began to move. It sailed rapidly, without wind or any other understandable means of propulsion. He sailed for Svi and Fanla Brule, the island of legends, the home of the gorged god. End of part 1.
Yep.
See, that was alright, that wasn't it?
Yeah, it's good, yeah.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
You've still got that kind of convenient get out of jail free cards that you tend to get with Moorcock stuff, but it's all very cool and really, really well written.
Yeah, it's good. I enjoyed it. It's great.
Yeah.
And then we meet Shul.
Yeah, we'll get to that one next time. So, on this reread, are you still satisfied that Corum is still your favourite?
Too right, yeah. He's not as, to be honest, he's got some excuses to be a bit cross and be a bit grumpy, hasn't he? His entire family's wiped out. It's not like Elric, is it, where he's going, oh, I'm an emperor. Oh, Jesus, I'm an emperor.
Oh, born of chaos to fight chaos.
At least in this case, he's like, yeah, everything's been wiped out that I love. Not happy about that. Found a bit of solace. Even that's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Corum's a good lad, I think. Not many laughs.
No.
But I think he's all right.
Yeah.
And I still think it's really lovely writing.
Yeah. We'll be back next time to see how he obtains the hand of Rill.
And the eye of...
Yeah. Let's not.
Yeah.
Not for a second episode running anyway. Okay, so we shall bring it to a close there, my friend Loz. So thanks once again for your time.
No bother.
And I'll see you for the next part.
Indeed, we will.
Draw. Thanks as always to Loz for being an excellent co-host, although recording 2 shows back-to-back may have been overly ambitious given our slate of ridiculous porters, but we got through it. Since our last outing, I'm delighted to say we have 2 more patrons, so huge thanks to John for exerting some sweat to service the Chaos Engine, and new Jugador Andrew, aka Kihar, a fellow podcaster currently in repose. His prodigious content is still available, just search for the Dissecting Worlds podcast. I'll put a link in the post blurb. Naturally, we remain hugely grateful to our other recent supporters, Mark, Neil, Loz, Craig and Steve, and of course to our old hands Simon P, Simon R, Tom, Jim, David, Fred, Malpertwee, and last, but by no means least, and in fact most of all, Lord Norman of the Higher Worlds, that most inscrutable Baker on the Rocks. Watch out for a recount of Gerard Arthur Connelly's encounter with that higher power shortly. It may not be accurate, of course. On the subject of GAC, Chapter 2 of his journal will follow momentarily, but in the meantime, you can find us on Twitter, @BreakfastRuins, on Instagram, @BreakfastRuins. You can email us if you use such outdated modes of communication, breakfastruins@outlook.com, or you can drop by the Patreon page, or indeed breakfastintheruins.com and leave any comments. So, it's time. A transition approaches. I'll see you next time on the Moonbeam Roads. Chapter 2. Europe, but not as I have known it. Another invasion. Satisfied that my home county of Norfolk was many miles away, and not on his list of potential allies of the enemy, Morton explained much to me. In the interest of minimising exposition, I shall summarise here. I was still in Europe. In fact, by my reckoning, I'd crashed somewhere in the Ardennes region on the borders of France and Belgium, although that name had little, if any, meaning in this sphere. Similarities did exist, and in sufficient number that Morton and I had enough in common that we could converse freely and easily, and as we travelled east, I would experience flashes of familiarity. These were quickly dismissed when we came across ruined areas of land upon which grew mutated, poisonous flora, or blasted heaths upon which nothing grew at all, and, according to Morton, never had and never would. More disturbing still is the nature of the enemy he described. The beast orders of Gran Bretagne were marching relentlessly into Europe, and, it appeared, no city-state could stand before them. Their methods of war are nauseating, and they have taken a terrible toll upon the inhabitants of any city, town, or village that does not embrace their presence. Morton described his journey from his home in Scandia, and his flight from the disastrous defence of Bruges. Other refugees on the roads reported news of Corum, fallen 2 years since, but risen in rebellion, and the Duke of Corum taken in chains to Londra, the capital city of the Dark Empire, to be presented to the ancient and godlike King Juan. I felt sickness welling up from the pit of my stomach as I heard more tales of the bloody crimes of my countrymen. We made for Saarbrück, a walled city just inside the country you and I would know as Germany. We were not alone. Many refugees and some surviving soldiery from encounters with the invaders were placing great faith in the Earl of Saarbrück and his walls of steel and stone. Many times we were forced to flee the roads when strafed by fire from gleaming gull-winged flying machines. These ornithopters gushed steam from the joints of their colossal wings, which swept back as they dove and, spitting ruby lances of light, turned fleeing men, women and children into shrieking torches that ran on a few steps before falling, their clothes and flesh burning fiercely in the tallow of their own body fat. So fierce is the power of these weapons that I saw steel armour fused with the bones of not only their wearer, but their unfortunate steed. I have witnessed the wholesale destruction of people before, but only ever from great distances, usually from above, aboard more elegant yet similarly deadly vessels of war. Those incidents seem like several lifetimes ago, and could not prepare me for this experience, made all the more visceral by the immediate sight, but also sound, smell, and even taste of human ruin. The dastardly craft would then scream overhead, trailing an acrid exhaust, their wings flapping like metal thunder, and then away they flew until the next time. This ritual was doubtless being repeated on all roads leading away from the battle zone. Morton would, wherever possible, lead me and any others who would follow along paths less trodden than the packed roads that so easily became charnel. We arrived in the vicinity of Saarbrück only in time to witness the fall of the walls and the slaughter of their brave defenders. It was near dusk on our third day of travelling together, and we stood in a tree line with an unobstructed view across a mile of vale. Arrayed before the walls was a morass of struggling men. The familiar sounds of a large engagement assailed our ears. The din was punctuated by the harmonic cries of huge bell-shaped war engines that made short work of seemingly impregnable walls and shattered the minds of any defender upon them. The greasy, soot-laced smoke from an incinerated cavalry charge drifted across the fields of ruin, and we heard the raucous roar of heavy-foot infantry in snarling masks created to resemble wolf, boar, and goat. The ragged gaps in the once proud walls were flooded with ruby, gold, and black armour, and the grotesque banners of beast orders. The gates fell in with a groan, and the fight was over, but not the killing. That would last well into the night. Wails and screams pursued us east as we fled once more. We would learn sometime later that the commander of the Grand Bretagne force was not content with the defeat of the garrison and had ordered the sack of Saarbrück.